This is An Infinite Path, spoken word essays by Niles Heckman, some of which go on to become our documentary short subject films, half of which release freely here through the podcast, all of which can be found through your support at nilesheckman.com. Hello, dear friend. So, episodes for this podcast do not get made very often. There has typically been, through the life of this venture, one per month at very most. In tandem with this, which essentially is me documenting conversations with known acquaintances, comrades, and collaborators, and thus involves me talking to other folks, I have also become a bit of an essayist. And it's very important for the autodidact to sharpen their skills in grammar, logic, and rhetoric, since one of the many ways to always do that is to read constantly and write constantly, which, as we know, the oily tentacles of the power pyramid don't want us to do, because that's when we might start to expand our minds and think for ourselves. These essays are written first by me, shared on the article and blog section of my website, and then my Medium blog, and then they have been read on camera by yours truly in my reality tunnel essays. As a documentarian who's behind the camera on many projects, I am a driving force behind many of the creative things that I create in terms of film projects with collaborators. But I've found that the profile of those who I was filming were being elevated, which is great, but mine wasn't. Which is fine too, because vanity doesn't need ego inflation, and that's not a priority. But what is nice is for people to not only know your work, but know a bit of the creator of those creations as well, which involves a bit of personal presence in front of camera at times. So I can be found around town on other folks' podcasts, which is always a pleasure and a joy, but that's usually voice only. And a realization struck me during a street photography workshop I was taking with a former guest of this podcast named Eric Kim. We were sitting on the steps of a public area in a main city in the United States on a Sunday, just he and I, when a young bloke noticed us and approached us and was ecstatic to meet and say hello to Eric, but could absolutely care less about me. So much to the point that he didn't even introduce himself to both of us, but just simply Eric, and completely ignored me, not to mention interrupting our conversation. This is because Eric has a YouTube channel which in the past has been featured on numerous very popular photo sites and allowed others in the photography field to essentially know who he was. Now, we are not seeking fame, and it's likely anyone who is truly famous has done some sort of dark sorcery to get there, and once they've gotten there, they've realized it's not at all what it's portrayed to be, and instead adds all sorts of new complications and problems. But what is nice, though, is to be known by your peers and well-respected in your field with a healthy audience base that enjoys your material. 1,000 true fans, if you will. So this young gentleman taught me an important lesson in life, about putting yourself out there a bit to the point where you are seen and somewhat known. Hence I started to, about a year ago from this recording, to read out these essays on YouTube. It's nice to put a face to the words, and also because it allows for another areas for these essays to be seen instead of just in text. They can be watched easily from a phone or tablet, for example, and allow more people to actually access them because, as we know, not as many people are willing to read. However, in more recent times, what has been going on in the YouTube area has not been very good, with significant amounts of trolling and comments, and worst of all, censorship from the company itself. When one talks about subjects of ancient mystery, occultism, esotericism, health, consciousness, earth medicines, spiritual philosophy, etc., they can be subject to censorship, since many of those areas stretch into realms that may be deemed contentious and too truthful for the mainstream, and may get your content a strike. Which I have not had these things occur on my personal channel because it's very much in obscurity, but audio files which are much more local to a website can be a much better medium for retaining your own content and free of potential future censorship. So as of this recording, I will also be adding these essays as an additional shorter sub-episode to this podcast. They are nice because they are done essentially by yours truly, which isn't reliant on others having to schedule, book, and prep for a guest, but also allows for a bit more content to come a bit more regularly to this podcast and access its pre-existing audience. So consider these sub-episodes. Take them or leave them. Perhaps you find them extra yummy additions to the conversations usually had on this venture with similar themes. But they can be skipped entirely or taken into account and cherished greatly. So hugs and high fives, much love, long may you shine. Here's the first of many. Essay 16. Setting Players to Zero. At the end of the 1983 film War Games, the characters outsmart the AI, which is intent to destroy them by setting players in the system to the number 0, forcing the computer to play tic-tac-toe against itself, resulting in a long string of draws, thus forcing the computer to learn the concept of futility and no-win scenarios. This is a brilliant metaphor for thinking outside the box and not being part of a garbage situation which has no good scenarios, such as military occupations of Afghanistan. Setting players to 0 basically means not doing things that are crap. In today's world of fake machine childish asleep robot culture, many people do things they don't want to be doing. This can be countered by doing anything as basic as spring cleaning of a house to as complex as disavowing your corporate fiction strawman all caps name which you are the primary security interest holder for. One example of setting players to 0 I've been personally doing as of late is purging social networks. Less is more. And every additional social network you're part of takes time, and time is your most valuable commodity. No one is going to be in the nursing home saying, "Man, I rocked Facebook that month." They're going to be on their deathbed thinking about all the life experiences they had, what they personally created, and who they became. A major part of human happiness is being creative by creating. The more time you're promoting, the less time you can create, but more on that later. Social networks are like high school yearbook signings, popularity contests. Most muggle people just want to use them to try and gain numbers, likes, and followers. They friend you or add you not because they want to reconnect or get to know you fresh, but because they want to +1 a number on their profile. They would be much more mature if they didn't even show any numbers and kept those things private on the networks themselves. Social networks prop this up by always showing the size of someone's network on their profile, which is totally unnecessary. This is one of the childish aspects of childish asleep robots. Those numbers are void regardless because if one wants to turn to the dark side, they can always buy followers, which is about as low as you get. Some massive percentage of politicians' Twitter followers are fake bots, for example. And since all fake things are mirrored back to front, social networks are not social. They're actually antisocial, meaning they have little to no connection with real authentic social behavior of fellowship, friendships, and relationships. These things always happen in the flesh, face to face. That's why a social network is best used if it gets you to real meetups. Hence, meetup.com is the best social network. A negative part of externalized hardware technology such as cell phones is this artificial smokescreen on what we're meant to naturally get in local and small communities. My wife is on 0 social networks but has a large network of real people she interacts with due to her patient population in real personal social circles, for example. That is a very healthy human behavior. You can be a selfish dumbass and still have quite a few horizontal fair-weather friends, though, because you like to go out a lot. Since your level of consciousness is mirrored by those who you interact with, those types of folks will be surrounded by other wankers such as themselves, and in the flesh, wearing sunglasses indoors at night in clubs and bars. This ultimately leads to shorter-term shallowness that's wide and broad, but at least they've left the keyboard. What's even less healthy is spending all of your time at the keyboard and never really leaving the house. Or if you do leave the house, you're a coffee shop troll who's still on the keyboard not socializing with other folks in the room. So why even be there in the first place? I recently went to a street photography workshop at the Leica store in San Francisco in an attempt to meet more local street photographers in the Bay Area, in the flesh. The majority of the photographers had some kind of high-end rangefinder camera. Rangefinders are great to see, regardless of brand. However, when it came to sharing the results of everyone's work, I came to realize that nearly everyone there was on Instagram. This is like driving around in an Aston Martin and going home to park it in a homogenized cookie-cutter suburban town home across the street from a 7-Eleven and gas station with bulletproof glass. Instagram is beyond rubbish. Retro style is fine, but the layout sucks and the tiny square aspect image frames are just terrible. Sadly, tons of youngsters are on Instagram at the moment because muggles love staring down at the app-based world of the phone. #lookup. On the other photographic social fronts, two other social networks I had purged in the past were Flickr and 500px. Flickr is dying because all things Yahoo are lukewarm at best, and 500px is beautiful, but I ultimately had to ask myself, how much time am I putting into this, and what am I really getting out of it? It became another weight in a series of small things which all added up. So even though Instagram still exists by me, I don't even have the app on my phone. I just have an app that allows me to quickly upload images and leave. So if you're going to stick with something, stick with it the minimum amount you can. Those are the slightly suggestive, condescending words from this single voice you're listening to here. So purging things digitally can be as important as purging the physical aspects of your life as well, with the final goal being to live in a tiny house, with the ultimate goal to be a Zen samurai on the path. On a final side note, I do totally acknowledge social networks are where all the muggles are, as well as some amount of B+ to A- at best humans, including awful Facebook and awful Twitter, which are probably just fronts for intelligence agency data collection. As a human who wants to try and connect to future others and reach out to large groups of fellow excellent humans, I understand and realize social networks can be a valuable tool to help facilitate that process. If done consciously as a tool in light moderation to meet other kindred spirits on your same wavelength in a vertical relationship, or to promote your cottage industry. Everyone wants eyes on what they create, and I'm no exception, and realize the power of having others follow your work. Sadly, many who have success with large social network followings then turn around and use their social networks to make money off their followers, which is fine if the content is worthy. And that's how some independent small business owners and operators need to function in our current state of post-truth capitalism. Trying to be an independent operator in this current Gen X internet tech world means becoming your own promoter, and socials are somewhat required to fulfill this. So I set players mostly to 0 and still play the game a bit on a few antisocial networks.